Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz. Brandis Friedman is on assignment. Here's what we're looking at.
This should be a landmark.
A resounding guilty verdict in the ComEd bribery trial. One of the jurors shares what message she hopes it sends to Springfield. And her Spotlight Politics team on Michael Madigan's future in light of that verdict. Plus, Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson selects a new interim police superintendent. The controversial practice of human composting. What exactly is that, and could it soon be coming to Illinois? And Chicago's Mexico Week kicks off today ahead of Cinco de Mayo, how the city is celebrating. But now to our top story tonight. Guilty on all counts. That's the landmark verdict in the ComEd corruption trial, and it could have massive repercussions as the alleged mastermind behind the bribery schemes, Michael Madigan, awaits his own trial. Jurors ultimately found that the schemes from 4 top ComEd officials to reward Madigan loyalists with no work jobs and contracts in exchange for Madigan's efforts to pass lucrative legislation, all of that amounted to bribery. And joining us is jury member Amanda Schnitker-Sayers, and thank you very much for being here. So what was the evidence? You had so much evidence and testimony to go through. What was the evidence and testimony that convinced you and the other 11 jurors that what happened here passed the Rubicon of lobbying into bribery?
Oh my goodness, there was not just one piece of evidence that, convinced us one way or the other. There were several key pieces of evidence, for sure. The transcripts that were between Michael Madigan and Mike McLean, those were, prime evidence, and we listened to those many times. Mm-hmm. And then we would notice the pattern of how after he would call after he would talk with Michael Madigan, he'd turn right around and then start doing what they talked about on that call. So especially when we looked at when they started adding Mike Zalewski, there were 4 calls right in a row, and it was Madigan asked for Zalewski with McLean. McLean turned around, talked to, I think it was Ann talked to Fidel. Fidel said yes, and then they turned around and then called Madigan back.
And you said Ann Pramaggiore, the former CEO, Fidel Marquez, who was a government informant here, but not
Yes.
charged. And so all of those recordings, all of that video, all of that witness testimony, what was that 27 hours like in the jury room deliberating?
Man, it was intense. It was very intense. We worked really hard. The jurors, we all had gotten to know each other really well throughout the time of the trial occurring, which was really good considering that we had a lot to go over and a lot of decisions to make. So everyone was respectful throughout the entire process. But this, arguments, not arguments so much, but discussions did get a little heated at some points, as it should have. But everything was very civil and professionally done.
So there were disagreements on some of the counts. There were debates on some of the counts.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. That's why it took us so long. And those of us who would feel strongly one way or the other, every other juror stopped, gave them time to speak, and then we would discuss their viewpoints. And for those of us who had evidence say that they thought they were not guilty, for those of us who said, no, we really respect that. Here's why I think, and let me pull this transcript, let me pull this email, let me pull all of this evidence. Here's testimony that I have written in my notebook. Let me read that for you. And then other people would chime in and say, yes, I have that same evidence. And that would refresh that other juror's memory, and then they would think about it. Sometimes we would have to go through a count, take a break on that, while some of the jurors wanted to really ponder it over a couple hours or even overnight, and then come back to that and then discuss it again.
And eventually everyone did come to consensus, obviously, on all of these counts. What is the message here, the broader message sent to our public office holders in Springfield, given what you all decided in this verdict related to how Madigan ran things and how so many things in Springfield have been run for so many years?
I think that message is really clear, right? So this is very clear. We do not want to stand for this sort of corruption, okay? These are all crimes. Whether the end result was good for Illinois, maybe there would have been something better that had come along if we wouldn't have done it in a illegal fashion, right? So just because the end result, it did not justify the means, And we as jurors agreed that we do not want to see our state run like that. And we do hope that this message is clear, that things need to occur along the proper channels to flow through the government that we have. We have a great government. Let it work correctly.
And obviously that message resonating probably with many public officials right now. Amanda Schnitker-Sayers, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much, Paris.
You bet. And now to some more of today's top stories. The Chicago Police Department has a new interim superintendent. Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson selects Fred Waller to lead the department until a permanent superintendent is chosen. Waller worked at CPD for 34 years, and he left the department in 2020, serving as its third highest-ranking official. Johnson says Waller will not be a candidate to serve as the permanent superintendent. Chicago's Police Oversight Agency releases video of a police officer fatally shooting a 24-year-old man in Garfield Park last month. Reginald Clay Jr. was shot and killed by officers during a police chase in which he turns back and begins moving toward the officer. While doing so, he appears to remove a firearm from his waistband. Block Club Chicago reports that Clay's family claims he did not point the firearm at police. His family reportedly filed a lawsuit against the police department, claiming the shooting was, quote, unprovoked and unwarranted. The full video that was released is on our website. Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson declines to endorse Mayor Lori Lightfoot's plan to transform a vacant South Shore High School into a shelter for migrants. Johnson says he will consult the South Shore community before making any final decisions in how to address a renewed surge of asylum seekers being sent to the city from Texas. Officials say the surge poses a humanitarian crisis, with the city's shelters all occupied. Lightfoot's office will host a community meeting at the former high school to talk about the plan, and will be live from there tomorrow night with all the very latest. Up next, a debate over a practice called human composting. What is that? We'll tell you right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Most folks are either buried or cremated when they die, but there is another practice that's gaining steam and causing controversy. It's called natural organic reduction, or human composting. A bill sponsored by state lawmaker Kelly Cassidy was narrowly approved by the Illinois House and is now before the Senate. If it passes, Illinois would become the 7th state in the nation to approve this practice. But the Catholic Church, among others, has voiced opposition, saying human composting does not afford enough dignity for the dead. And joining us now to share their perspectives are State Representative Kelly Cassidy, a Democrat from Chicago, and David Bonagura Jr., author of Steadfast in Faith, Catholicism and the Challenges of Secularism. We did invite the Archdiocese of Chicago and the Catholic Conference of Illinois to join us for this conversation, but they denied our invitation. We are glad that the two of you are here. Kelly Cassidy, I kind of described this in the lead here, but what exactly is human composting?
So this comes about out of a desire for folks to have a way to continue to reduce their carbon footprint, even in death. And the current methods that are available, each one of them has an environmentally problematic component. In the two processes that the Catholic Church does approve of, burial, your bodily fluids are drained, you are pumped full of chemicals, and you're sealed in a concrete box underground. From an environmental perspective, we've got the chemical issue, but we also have the land use issue. We are running out of land. And so there are those who feel like that's not the best use of land. Cremation has emissions, and I learned in this process, the ashes are actually really harmful to plant life. And so I used to think that people were mean for not letting people scatter ashes. The reality is that they do real harm. So this is a process whereby somebody is put into a vessel with natural dry materials, very often flowers, so that you can have a respectful and beautiful ceremony. And within that chamber, it takes about 30 days, and you are reduced to very, very nutrient-rich compost that you can use to plant a tree, that many providers are using to restore damaged lands. And so for many people, that is a true expression of what they want for their end of life process.
And so
they
there
want
are
to
more
continue to improve the earth.
More and more folks choosing this method. David Bonagura, you recently wrote a column calling this repulsive. What's your objection to this process?
Well, human composting quite literally erodes human dignity. Human beings come into existence. We're given the great gift of life. And then that life is supposed to be treated with dignity and respect all the way into the ground, but also beyond the ground, into the ground, into death, in an awareness of the fact that there was a person here, and this person is worthy of respect in death just as in life. Countless burial practices of cultures for thousands of years have honored the dead in different ways, but one essential way is keeping the body together. And it's as if Mother Nature wants to remind us of that fact. Even though our physical body will decay, our bones will remain, a physical marker through all of history that reminds us that this is a person, a unique person with a story, who has a memory that lives on, and we ought to do that person respect by treating him as nature would treat him, or her, as an intact human being all the way into eternity.
Representative Cassidy, what about that criticism that this does not afford the human body the dignity, as some Catholic representatives are alleging here, in death, that it deserves?
I would say that, first of all, this is as close to dust as you could possibly hope for. And, ultimately, this is about respecting individual traditions and priorities. The Catholic Church can and has, made statements about what is and isn't appropriate for disposal of human remains. I would say that, in a cremation, your bones don't burn either. They go in a machine called a cremulator that are ground up into a powder and added back to the ash. That doesn't keep the bones intact either. Yet the Catholic Church is fine with that and has been for about 20 years since they got into the business of providing cremation services.
All right, so David Bonagura, I'll have you respond to that. The Catholic Church doesn't condemn the practice of cremation. It is allowed at Catholic ceremonies. So what's the difference here between cremation and composting?
Cremation is allowed but not preferred in the Catholic tradition precisely because of the value we place on the body. As a religious tradition, we think the body has been ignobled in such a great way through the incarnation, that Jesus Christ became God and gave body an incredible dignity. He divinized it. So even in cremation, if we allow that, the church requires that the ashes and bones be kept together and not separated. To separate is really to denigrate the nature of the person. One of the great tragic elements of September 11th was that so many of those bodies were not able to be recovered, and those people were lost into oblivion, just like people who are composted are. There's no way to bring closure or peace to this.
I'm sorry, you're comparing this to a terrorist attack? Please.
It's what happened to the bodies.
And let's stay with the facts, man. Come on.
Those were bodies that were lost to all eternity.
And that has nothing to do with a person making a conscious choice to use a low impact process to dispose of their remains in a way that is consistent with their belief system. I respect your belief system. I'm not asking Catholics to be cremated or to be composted. I have no business telling a Catholic what to do with their body post-death. Just as the Catholic Church doesn't have any business telling an environmentalist that they have to use an environmentally damaging process to handle their remains.
All right, David Bonagura, let me
make laws that reflect the values of our culture, and to allow human composting, to allow our bodies to be thrown into oblivion.
This is not a Catholic country.
Okay, but David Bonagura, what about that?
We can offend the body in death, we can do it in life as well.
The fact that but if an individual chooses this, Mr. Bonagura, why not allow it if there are individuals who may or may not be Catholic choosing this method?
Well, there's all sorts of limitations on what people can do. We limit people's use of guns. We limit people's use of property. There's limitations on what people can do. Just because people want something doesn't mean it's necessarily good for them. For society to consent to a legal composting is to consent to doing away with an element of human dignity. And once you start with this, what is the next thing to erode?
What is dignified about the state of Catholic cemeteries? When the Catholic Conference came out against this bill, I heard from numerous families at a Catholic cemetery here in Sangamon County where there are open holes where there are graves. There are gravestones that have been crumbled. Every time there are piles of debris all over the cemetery. When does it stop?
Obviously, this is a very passionate debate, and we could continue this, but we are out of time, so I do have to leave it there. Our thanks to State Representative Kelly Cassidy and David Bonagro. We appreciate your views. And up next, our Spotlight Politics team on the bombshell verdict in the ComEd bribery trial, so please stay with us. The guilty verdicts in the ComEd bribery trial were a bombshell, as we just said. So what does it all mean for former House Speaker Michael Madigan? We explore that and more in tonight's edition of Spotlight Politics. Joining us, of course, are Amanda Vinicky and Heather Cherone, my good friends. Heather Cherone, what are the odds right now that Mike Madigan's attorneys are having a discussion with his client saying plea deal is an option here?
Well, I believe they're ethically obligated to go to the former speaker and say, look, they convinced a jury of 12 men and women that you were behind a bribery scheme that affected the operation of the state's largest public utility. Please think carefully before you face a similar jury. I don't think any of us at this table expect him to take a plea deal, but it is a sign that when the U.S. Attorney's Office brings charges against you, they do not go in half-cocked or without having all of their ducks in a row.
And you heard what the juror just said. They all wanted to send a message. We don't accept this. We don't like this. So this is reverberating. Let's hear from former Assistant U.S. Attorney Patrick Collins, who prosecuted former Governor George Ryan and is now a defense attorney. He thinks Mike Madigan has a tough road ahead.
If you're Speaker Madigan and his legal team, you can't see this verdict and think, oh, great, let's go to trial tomorrow. Because what it was, I think, was a repudiation for the sort of legal lobbying, and this is sort of rough and tumble politics. So that's bad news. The good news, if you're an attorney, you saw how the government's witnesses played out. You heard them under oath.
Amanda Vinicky, these four defendants now face jail time, although their attorneys have said they will appeal. What are the odds that one or two or all of them flip for the Madigan case to avoid a long jail sentence?
Well, so a couple of things there, Paris. First of all, in terms of what Collins said, he said one advantage for Madigan, however, is that during the case, you didn't really see, and this is in fact something that the defense brought up, what actions Madigan took to try to reward. He said essentially it was pay but no play, quid. Where was the quo? And that's something that may help Madigan when it is time for him to go to trial. Of course, it could hurt him if one of these defendants does in fact flip. But I asked Collins that very question. He said, you know, so far, McLean has proven to be pretty darn loyal. It's not as if the pressure wasn't high on him prior to this. He had not one but two cases brought against him by the feds.
But some of the others, Ann Pramaggiore, clearly in the testimony, no love lost for Madigan here. She wasn't the close friend.
She said that she testified that they weren't particularly close, but she also did take the stand. So Collins says that takes a little bit of the ability for her to then flip away. She's already said everything, so if she changes her tune, that's not particularly believable. Furthermore, if they're not that close, what all does she know?
All right, so Heather Cherone, is there a very clearly defined line now as a result of this verdict between lobbying, legal lobbying, and bribery?
I think that's what makes this verdict so strong, is that the jury clearly spoke with one voice and said, look, this is not okay. This is not sausage making. This is not politics as usual. And it's not only Michael Madigan, who I think is having some hard conversations today. I would expect Alderman Ed Burke to be getting a similar message from his attorneys. His defense is likely to also sort of say, well, it's just politics. Clearly, the jury says not anymore and not in Illinois.
Well, and I think also, just in general, practices, people getting a little shaky in terms of their conversations, boosting somebody up. Who are you going to decide to hire as a contract lobbyist,
what about
and
current
why?
lobbyists and public officials? Amanda, you're in touch with these people. What are they saying right now?
Well, no, I mean, I think that it is just that it is in some ways, clearly the jury did speak with one voice, but there's murky ground there. Why do you hire somebody? For their relationships, for their contacts, for their inside knowledge. You have a lot of people that are still doing pretty darn great as contract lobbyists in Springfield who were mentioned in the trial. And some of them, people would say, yeah, they're hardworking. They deserve to be hired for those positions. Others would say, well, no, they got that because they were recommended by somebody. Where do the lines cross? I don't know that it is
Well,
that
I think
clear.
clearly
Despite
providing-
the acting U.S. attorney, by the way, saying that we want people, if you have a question, seek out legal advice. He said that repeatedly.
Giving jobs and contracts, especially for no work,
That's
crossing the
Wait,
line.
what?
Yeah, let's shift gears into another big story today. Fred Waller, a very familiar name for the Chicago Police Department. He's going to take over in the interim basis. Is this kind of a surprising choice by Brandon Johnson?
Well, Fred Waller was one of a number of high-profile Chicago police leaders who left under former Superintendent David Brown. He says he's coming back to sort of lead the department in a very difficult moment. Brandon Johnson said he was the right guy who had risen through the ranks and could lead the department. But anybody who has worked for the Chicago Police Department for 34 years, as he does, has had brushes with controversy. Fred Waller was very close to a sergeant tied to Ronald Watts, who is, of course, tied to a massive police scandal. And today, I asked Fred Waller about remarks he made that likened the redeployment of officers to rape. He said he apologized for that, but that it was taken out of context. And even though he was suspended for 28 days, he used his banked vacation time to serve that, so he wasn't really punished.
I think viewers can read more about that exact controversy on our website, Heather. All right, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Schroen, thank you as always. And up next, how the city is celebrating Mexico Week. But first, we take a look at the weather. Cinco de Mayo is this Friday, and Chicago, you know, will be celebrating. The Consulate General of Mexico in Chicago is hosting the return of Mexico Week for the second year starting today. And this year, they're partnering with the state of Jalisco, offering Mexican and Jalisco-inspired dishes, traditional dances, and much more. The celebrations come amid heightened concerns over migrants that are coming to Chicago and as the Title 42 border policy is set to come to a close. And joining us to discuss all of this and more is Consul General of Mexico in Chicago, Reina Torres Mendivil. Consul General, welcome to Chicago tonight.
Thank you so much.
All right, so give us a snapshot of the events planned for Mexican Week and the Jalisco flavor here.
Well, we're very excited to celebrate this a year for the second time, Cinco de Mayo. And we build our program around Cinco de Mayo because we know that is a day that it lives in the imagination of everybody, not only Mexicans, but also people without Mexican roots that enjoy Mexican food and enjoy Mexican traditions. So Jalisco is a featured state for many reasons, because everybody knows tequila, mariachi, but also because our Jalisco community here is huge. It's one of the largest hometown origins that we have here among our diaspora. So we're delighted to kind of fulfill everybody's taste with Jalisco.
All right, so tell us some of the foods that'll be showcased and some of the cultural traditions.
Well, precisely today, many things started. One of those is the gastronomic route. So 18 restaurants in the Chicago area are participating in this and are preparing a specific meal that is coming from Jalisco. So you can follow our social media. You can go to one of these fabulous restaurants and enjoy Jalisco traditions.
And I have to ask you, this is a very joyous event. It comes amid all the concern over migrants that are coming to Chicago, the end of Title 42. That's the policy that allowed expelling asylum seekers at the border because of COVID. That's going to come to an end. How does the government of Mexico view all of this? What's the perspective from Mexico?
This is not something that can be addressed unilaterally. You know, for many reasons, it's a very complex issue, and different elements, you know, get involved in finding solutions for specific things. Just yesterday, the Homeland Security, one of the Homeland Security advisors visited Mexico and met with President López Obrador and with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and they issued a press release kind of targeting the basic points. This is a long-term issue. We cannot come up with solutions that, you know, are going to make things disappear from one day to the other. It's a humane issue as well.
And I should throw in that this is an issue for Mexico too, because many of the migrants are not originally from Mexico.
Exactly.
They're traveling through Mexico.
Exactly.
The country of Mexico has to deal with
So
housing and...
All of us should do our part. For example, Mayor Lightfoot addressed this issue just recently with a letter that she sent to Governor Abbott. Here in the consulate, one of the things that we are doing is we're trying to provide textbooks from Mexico in Spanish for the school districts that now are trying to process these kids that are coming and find themselves in this area without, any possibility for education in their own language. So to help that, we have included many schools in our program to distribute Mexican textbooks that could be a very useful tool for them. And I know that the organizations, CPS, really welcomes this because it's a big help.
Very quickly, what do you think the end of Title 42 will mean for the U.S. and Mexico?
It's going to create perhaps some noise. And let me tell you one of the things that have been happening. It's creating noise because traffickers and people dealing with human trafficking are taking advantage of this. They are saying, you have to go right now because after May 11, things are going to change. And that's not true, actually. The U.S. government has put in place many processes additional to what they usually have to make sure that all those asylum seekers can figure out some path to be able to come to the U.S. One of those are those regional centers that they are going to open in different countries in Central America, so to prevent these flows to come all the way and to go through these ordeals to go to the border.
So as you said, this is going to take the U.S. cooperating with all of Central America, not just Mexico and not the U.S. alone. All right, but issue at hand, Mexico Week. It sounds like a lot of fun, sounds delicious, and I know that millions of Chicagoans will be celebrating this. Reina Torres Mendeville, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and hope to see you there to celebrate
You
Mexico.
bet. All right.
Bye.
And you can find more details about Mexico Week in Chicago on our website. And we're back to wrap things up right after this. And that's our show for tonight. And for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz. Have a wonderful evening.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to recognize its 18 attorneys selected for the 2023 Super Lawyers List.